Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas visiting with Sheridan Snowden from the Daughters of the American Revolution and hearing some amazing stories about some of these women of the Revolution. Before we get back to Margaret, because there's more on her, it seems to me that when war is horrible and violent, but it seems that it was fought with a different sense of civility back in the day. I'm thinking of Mammy Kate being allowed to come visit a prisoner of war camp and bring food to someone that she cared very much about. They had a friendship.
I don't think the British knew that.
Oh,
I think that she was more a camp follower. She went on any pretext. Like she would go even into British camps and do laundry or something, but she would hear things that she would take back.
So she could kind of work her way in and not be too suspected again, because people were not paying too much attention to women.
She was a slave, so.
My goodness, she's very, could be very important to get some word back to people if all she had to do was pay attention. So interesting. Let's get back to Margaret. All right. So the DAR did award her, even though she was a rough woman.
Right. Now they did take her where she was buried, take her body and bury it at West Point. Put a monument there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now she was the first woman, I say, to get a pension. She only got half of what the man got.
Really?
But she did get a clothing allowance, and she did ask for a rum ration, and she got that.
That maybe made up for the other half.
Now, just in 2017, though, they were doing some work at the monument at West Point, and one of the workers accidentally hit something and body parts fell out. Well, they thought, is this Margaret or is this another person is buried there? So they had to examine them. And with the DNA as it is and everything, they found that this was not Margaret at all.
What? The person buried there is not Margaret?
It's a man.
What?
Yes. But see, they identified her by her injuries.
Yes.
So
what happened to Margaret?
We're looking for her.
Oh my goodness!
Yes.
What a tale!
Yes.
Is that perhaps why the people didn't want to build a statue for her because of this mistaken identity of corpses?
No, I don't think they knew that then. She was still alive then.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yes, she was still alive.
Well, that's just fascinating.
Yes, but this was just in 2017.
You do wonder, how were these mistakes made? Wow, that's interesting.
Yes.
You've done more research.
I have.
Who else can you tell us about?
Nancy Morgan Hart.
Okay.
Now, Nancy, she's actually cousin to Daniel Boone.
Really?
And she's quite a woman. She was born in Pennsylvania, but she married Benjamin Hart, who was a lieutenant in the Revolution, and they moved to Georgia. They ended up in Georgia. Well, Nancy was, she hated Tories, and she hated the British, and she would do anything to protect her family. So she would help, anybody escape from them or whatever. Now, she was a tall woman. She was a big woman as well, and she had had smallpox whenever she was a child, and she had a red hair and temper to match is what I hear. So she was, one day she was boiling soap at the fireplace. Well, her daughter saw somebody peeking through the crack in the cabin. So Nancy took a ladle of the boiling soap and flung it at that crack.
And asked questions later.
Yes. And she went out and hogtied that Tory.
Whoa.
And took him down to the nearest militia camp. So she would go into the British camps. She dressed like a man. Mm-hmm. And she would act like she was all crazy. And then she'd hear these British plans, and then she'd take them back to Colonel Clark. Wow. In Georgia. And one time she was going over to a British camp, and she couldn't cross the river. She put some logs together and floated across the river.
My goodness.
Now, her big thing, she was one day they were at the cabin, and these British soldiers came by, and they, just stormed in. Well, they said, they wanted her to cook them something to eat. And she said, I don't have anything to cook. So one of them went out and shot one of their turkeys and brought it in and said, here, cook this. So she cooked the dinner, and all the time she was fuming and very upset. She had her daughter with her, Suki. Suki was her name. And so one point she, tried to devise a plan. So she went ahead and asked her daughter to go down to the spring to get some water. And she told the British she needed it for cooking. Well, so down by the spring, though, there was this conch shell. You've seen those?
Yes.
Big conch shell. That's what they would use to let people know that the Tories or the British were in the area. So, see, her father and the neighbors were out fighting the British. So she came back, and she had done her duty. Well, but this time Nancy has figured out this plan, because she's passing through. When she's serving the Tories there, she passes through. They put their guns up at the wall, and the table's over here. So she's passing through the guns and the soldiers there. Well, she kind of gets the idea. They've been drinking, too, now. So now they're really, loud and boisterous. So she passed a gun to the daughter out the door. She passed another one to the daughter the next time. On the third one, the Tories saw her, and they jumped up. She grabbed the gun, and she said, you move, and I'll shoot you. Well, the one guy lunged toward her. She shot him.
Oh, my goodness.
And then another one did, and she shot him,
too.
too.
My goodness.
So now, by this time, her husband, Benjamin Hart, had returned with the neighbors, and they said,
Nancy, what have you been up to?
Yes, and she said they wanted to shoot him, and she says no. She says shooting's too good for him. I want him hung.
Whoa!
So they took him out by the cabin and hung them.
Really?
Now, to just some evidence for this story to be true, in 1912, when they were constructing the railroad, they found 6 bodies buried right neatly in a row.
Wow.
And they'd been said, yes, by the cabin. And the Daughters of the American Revolution have reconstructed the Hart cabin pretty much on the site with an original chimney parts that they had from the cabin.
Are you struck by the bravery of these women? Because you mentioned hanging. What could have happened if any of these would have been caught or punished for resisting?
They probably would have been given the same fate that the men were.
Yes.
I mean, she was just, brave.
But when you think how spunky and brave they are.
Yes. And you know that in Georgia there's a Hart County, only woman with the county named after her.
Named after her.
There are schools, parks, roads named Nancy Hart, so.
Do people know the story attached to the names of their schools and roads and counties?
I don't know. That's an interesting question, because here in Canton, a lot of people don't know the attachment to McKinley High School.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Interesting. Yeah. Well, can anyone get you to come perform for them?
Yes, they can. In fact, I have just given the Women in the Revolution program up in Strongsville. And I just gave Dolly Madison down here in Canton. Dolly Madison and the Star-Spangled Banner. I gave that program to the Trisosis group. They're a philanthropical group. And I have one program coming up that I'm doing in Copley. So, and I go different places. I go to different DAR chapters,
Wonderful. What's the best way to reach you and say, Sharon, we want you to come to our next program, and we want you to be Nancy Morgan Hart?
Yes. Yes, well, probably the best is on email, and that would be usadarling@hotmail.com.
Love it. Okay, usadarling@hotmail.com. How do you go about researching and finding out this so much information about these little-known women.
Right. Yes. Yes, I have. Well, there's many books that are written. And like I say, Brian Kilmeade's book, that George Washington's Secret Six, I did, research through that. But then when I found her, I went other places to research. And just finding the books, finding what's on the internet, and different things. So
when you're portraying them, do you feel a connection with these ladies that lived so long ago?
Yes, I do. I do. On the one here that we haven't talked about, I get teared up.
Oh, and I've got to hear. I've got to hear about her.
And then somebody will say, "Well, what happened to?" I say, "Well, he was my little boy. He was my little boy."
Tell me, who have we not talked about yet?
Elizabeth Hutchinson Jackson.
Tell me quickly, as much as you can.
She's from Ireland. She and her husband Andrew had come over with their 2 little boys. Now, her sisters had come before her, so she was, knowing that they could own land was something they couldn't do in Ireland. So they were on their way. They came into South Carolina, into the back country there, where her sisters lived. Now, her boys eventually would join this militia, and her husband actually tried to farm the land. And in his 3rd year, he finally got a crop, but he fell over dead.
Oh, my.
And so there was no time to grieve, though, because she was pregnant. And she delivered the little boy 3 days after they buried her husband.
My.
His name was Andrew, so she called him Andrew after his father. Now, Andrew was selected at 9 years old to read the Declaration of Independence. And these boys, the British soldiers came in one time, just stormed in their cabin and ordered Andrew to shine his boots. And Andrew refused. So the British guy took the sword to him. He had gashes in his scalp and in his hands and arms. Now, the brother, the same way. One brother was still alive, and he got gashes in his. They took those boys, marched them 40 miles to the prison with these injuries. Now, Elizabeth, she wanted to, help get the boys out. Now, her sister had had 4 boys, too, and she was kind of in care for them because her sister had passed away. So she wanted to get all the boys out. So she went and she worked out a prisoner exchange. Now, I don't know exactly what that was, but she got them out. Well, on the way home, Andrew walked with no shoes, and the older boy was delirious. He couldn't even hold himself, so she tied him to the horse, and she rode the other horse. Andrew walked, and they came home. Well, the oldest boy died from smallpox whenever they got home. Then she noticed it on Andrew, but she was able to nurse him back to health. Well, then she wanted to get the neighbor boys, so she went back to the prison. She got sick and died from her, the disease. Well, Andrew was on his own. And he grew up. He was a lawyer in Tennessee and became at 61, the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson is who we're talking about. Well, we've got to end it there. We just have no idea what our forefathers and foremothers went through to give us the freedoms we enjoy today. You can find out more from the DAR. You can contact Sharon Snowden at usadarling@hotmail.com. Sharon, thank you so much for all you do in our community.
Well, thank you, Susie.